You're listening to Inspire Instructor Podcast, where the learning never stops. Welcome, you wonderful people, and thank you for listening to Inspire Instructor Training Podcast. So we've got some exciting news. There's only 19 days now until the launch of Inspire Instructor Training's new membership called the Inspirationals. With this membership, we are going to be offering Zoom sessions, training videos, ask us anything on the Facebook Lives, sit in the back of lesson videos, so loads and loads of extra content. And on today's podcast, we talk about how CPD is so important, and we aim with this Inspirationals membership to offer you a mentorship and a continuous training development, so you're not just going off and having a one-off big course once a year at best. What we're trying to offer you is continuously improving as instructor, continually having support there to become the best instructor you can be. So yeah, 19 days, we're going to be putting out loads more content to let you know what's going to be on offer. So for now, if you just go and join and follow us on Facebook, Inspire Instructor Training, and all the information will be going out on that. So on to today's podcast. We talked to Lee Spary, the ADI and PDI Doctor. Lee is great. He's got loads of knowledge, and he shares that with us today. And we talk about word directions and instructions given to the pupil clear and given in good time. And we also discuss Unit 5 of the National Standards for Driver and Rider Training, which is all about CPD. And then if you listen to the end, you can listen to Lee's great top tip at the end. So on to the show. So welcome everyone. We have a doctor in the house tonight. So welcome Lee Spary. Thank you for coming on and joining us.
You're very welcome.
So Lee, I wanted to kind of start out with, as I have done with everyone, I always get interested by everyone's different journeys into the industry and through the industry. I think this industry in particular has quite a massive range of different stories and characters within it. So I always quite like to get a bit of background on you guys before we dig into some learning. So yeah, how did you get into the industry, Lee?
I used to be a store manager for Blockbuster Video. I did that for a few years with quite a lot of success, actually. My store won. I got the Store of the Year award, and they sent me to New York for 5 days with like $3,000 spending money. It was all it was really, really plush, really nice. And I'd not even been abroad before. I didn't even have a passport, so my first trip on a plane was to New York. And that started to go, a bit pear-shaped. And I kind of saw that it was. And the thing that being a store manager was it was like juggling balls. We had you merchandised the store, and you recruited staff, and you did the schedule, and you set sales targets, and it was just but the ball that I enjoyed juggling the most was training the staff, because I'd gone from being a little till person to an assistant manager and then a manager. So I wanted to help other people in the company make that journey. So I found the training really, really nice. And then when Blockbuster was sort of showing signs of decline, I thought I'm jumping off this ship. I can see where it's going. The CEO at the time, we went to a big national conference, and one of the questions to him was, how do you see kind of the influx of online rental and how affecting the business? And he said, my daughter downloads music, and it takes 15 minutes to download one song. So who's going to download a film? And that was in 2005, and that's when I decided, yeah, it's time to go. He's not seeing the big picture. And 4 years later, it was wound up. So I got out at the right time. But I thought, training staff is what I love. So how can I do that without having to juggle all the other balls? And it just kind of seemed like a nice fit. It was something that I was thinking about for maybe a couple of years. And I once went to my mum's house for a cup of tea, and there was a radio advert on for Red Driving School. They were doing like a big recruitment at the time. And she turned around and said, "Lee, I think you'd be really good at that." And that was the first time anyone had said that after like 2 years of me thinking about it. And it just kind of confirmed that's what I'm going to do. So that's how it all started, really. And I qualified in 2008.
So, okay, so you started in 2008, and did you go with Red then?
Well, I trained with what were called the instructor college at the time, and they were bought by Red. So by default, I was then with Red. But because of my experience in the training, I decided not to do a franchise with them. I went with AA instead. Did that for 2 years, then went independent and built my business up from scratch, like you do. Then I moved to Liverpool in 2017, and I really didn't want to go through the whole building up my business again from scratch in a place that I had nobody knew who I were. So I went back with AA then, and I've sort of been franchised with them since. Although they're now a very small part of what I do. I still sort of franchise with them because it's kind of easier, which we're going to be talking about on a different thing soon about based on questions that we've seen this morning. But yeah, it's I do that, but I don't work with learners anymore. So that's kind of been the big change over like the last 18 months, just kind of purely with PDIs now and ADIs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So, if it's very similar to my story in that I was with BSM, then went solo, and then went back to BSM, for different reasons, but yeah, sort of kind of similar sort of kind of story there. I also again find it interesting that you're still with the franchise, and which I think again, if you think about the typical driving instructor story, and actually if you think about someone who is training driving instructors on a regular basis, it's not the typical story. I would say, maybe, I suppose there are lots of trainers within those big schools, but they're not necessarily putting themselves out there like you are. So yeah, you said it's easier. What, like, are there any particulars there that have kept you with AA?
Well, I mean, there's contractual obligations at the moment, which if maybe they weren't there, then maybe I wouldn't be with them. But we'll see where the future holds, or what the future holds in that regard. But when I've always put it together in terms of, especially when I was starting in a new place, so when I moved back to Preston, it was the same thing again, like nobody who knew who I were. And it's like when I moved to Liverpool, it was the same. So, I put down all the numbers in terms of, buying a car or renting a car, and insurance and tax and advertising, because nobody knew who I were again. And it wasn't that much different with the franchise for AA. So I thought it's just easier to just focus on what I do and not have to worry about all the other stuff. I think when I put the numbers together, it was a bit cheaper to be independent, but it weren't that much cheaper. So I thought, yeah, just easier. I can just do my work and not have to worry about the rest of it, which makes it easier, I think.
Yeah, I think it's I just find that really interesting, because they get, like, the big companies and the big franchises get a bit of a bad rep sometimes, because sometimes the service isn't great. But I think some people even think about this about small franchises as well. Actually, some people look at that and go, why don't you just go on your own? And it's because it's not for everyone. And it is that trade-off between, I suppose, cost and hassle.
Yeah, that's completely what it is. I mean, I've done both, and I know which one is less hassle. I mean, I'm at kind of a point now where I've got a lot of people telling me that you don't need the AA anymore, because of your reputation now. You could do something on your own, but at the moment I'm tied into a contract. So when that contract ends, then I can have a rethink about what I want to do. But at the moment I'm kind of stuck whether I want it to be or not, really, at the moment. So
do you think a little bit of that lack of hassle in having to find your maybe like your regular PDIs in car training has in a way left you that space to set up your ADI PDI doctor, and you may not have been able to do that if you were solo?
Potentially. I mean, I think if I didn't have the ADI doctor thing, then I would still work with learners because I'd have the time to. You'll always have a scenario where there's more people who want to learn to drive than there are people that want to be a driving instructor. So I think it's very hard to do PDI training full time without having learners. But what I've just done is swapped out learners for the online side of things. So I think whether I was franchised or not, I think that'd be the same situation. But I get some PDIs from AA, and I work with my four wheels as well, and they give me some PDIs, but it would never be enough to fill a diary for a week. But I'd say probably 70% of my diary now is online anyway, so I only need that little bit of support from like my four wheels, AA, BSM, that kind of thing. Plus I generate my own PDIs as well through people who know me in the area. So yeah, it's becoming less and less that I need to be with the AA to keep working with PDIs full time. But that over the next 18 months, that's where that'll kind of come to a head either way, I think.
Yeah, maybe they'll listen, they'll give you a pay rise.
They won't.
So you mentioned a couple of times about not teaching learners, which I think is interesting, and in that a lot of trainers, they get to that point and they stop teaching learners. Do you miss it?
Yes and no. I mean, I still do teaching learners because obviously with part 3 training, the option is that the PDI might want to see a lesson, and they'll jump in the back and I'll demonstrate a lesson for maybe 40 minutes. And then we'll swap back over and they'll do a lesson. So I still, I'm pretty hands-on with learners. I just don't have my own. But I think, 15 years is kind of a long time doing the same thing. So I think it's kind of a refreshing change. Although I do miss learners, but that satisfaction you get, when someone passes is the same as when someone passes a part 3 exam. So I'm not missing out from that side of things.
Yeah, I think actually almost not everybody, but almost it's I think passing a part 3 I find is more satisfying from my side, because it's this sort of kind of like almost like learning to drive is kind of like what everyone does. And a lot of people see it as just a rite of passage, and whereas this like becoming a driving instructor for a lot of people is a lot of hard work and a lot of like they put a lot into it, and there's a career on the line and financials and stuff. So actually the satisfaction of someone passing from that side, I think actually can sometimes be stronger.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that the satisfaction is definitely stronger, but that's mitigated against the stress of it as well. Because if you're talking about someone's career, you're talking about someone's livelihood. I didn't really see that, until I started working with PDIs, that like, I need to be at the top of my game here, because their livelihood is that they're what they feed the kids with. This is the money for that. So you can't do this half-assed. You've got to really invest in it. You've got to be, you've got to do everything you can to help these people get over the line, because it's their livelihood at risk, isn't it? So it comes with more responsibility, which then in turn, when they do pass, is like euphoric and really nice.
Don't sound like Spider-Man. Oh, you're not into Marvels, are you? Terry would have got that.
I do get the reference. I have seen Spider-Man.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's interesting that, and you're right. I get the same. Is you really get invested in someone's journey and wanting them to obviously pass, but yeah, you do feel the pressure. It's like sat up at night going, how can I help this PDI, or what can we do? What can we do on our next session? On that note, then, so actually, you said about how this is their livelihood, this is how they're paying their like mortgage. Is that something that maybe could be changed in the industry in a sense? Like, do we sort of kind of set ourselves up for this pressure by allowing PDIs to start the job? And I know the trainee license isn't supposed to be for earning, but people do use it, particularly if you're paying for a franchise and stuff. Um, yeah, do you think there's maybe something that should change there?
I think the training license has its kind of pros and cons, doesn't it? So the hands-on experience of the job is great for them. And back in the day, when I took my part three, I didn't go on it because there was, for me, in my eyes, there was no point at all, because I thought, well, my training's role play and the exam is role play, so I don't really need to. But it's definitely got its advantages, but it also comes with its pressures as well, which would be the cons, that you PDIs feel pressure to perform at a certain standard that they might not be at yet, because they're getting paid to do it. And they get the same pressure of parents having a go at them if it's not right, and I think that can sometimes be a little bit too much to take. I think people aren't free to just mess up because there's consequences, because someone's paying for it and there'll be a complaint, or do you know what I mean? And as you know, that the best kind of training is consequence-free and non-judgmental, but they are then put in a situation where they will be judged by the learner and the parents, because they're paying for a service. And a lot of the national driving schools, the rate of pay is the same. So they're paying full price for a PDI. And I don't think they know that. I don't think they realize that at the time. But I think certainly I don't think it's the case with AA, but with my four wheels, the rate of pay is the same. So those those PDIs are from the customer's point of view, should be, giving the same level of service that a fully qualified ADI is doing.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure in that, isn't there, actually? And a lot of benefit to, even if actually you're on a trainee license, maybe offering out free lessons on occasion that you get. I remember actually Terry talked about this on one of his podcasts, about whether you're PDI, ADI, whatever, just like offering out a free lesson where you get to be selfish as an instructor. Like, you go, I'll give you a free lesson, but this one's about me. I'm going to try all this weird stuff that I learned on this course.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to feel weird and it's not going to work, but we'll go with it, and then we'll see, and then I'll find out what does work and stuff. So yeah, maybe that's the answer, is also offering those sessions where you get to be a bit selfish as a PDI or ADI.
Yeah, I mean that's what I always suggest for my PDIs. I think whenever I'm there, it should be a free lesson. Because in the nicest possible way, I don't care about your learner. I'm here for you, right? So if something happens that could, if unfixed, lead to you failing your part three, then I've got no qualms at all at stopping the lesson and having a proper lengthy 10-15 minute conversation about this thing. And the learner's just going to sit there, and that's tough, because I'm not there for that. That's not my job. So if the learner is getting a free lesson, they're going to get lots of benefits from it, but they're also, I think the PDI is then not going to feel pressure and try and hurry me up, which I've seen before. Rightly, yeah, the learner sat there, and that's the kind of thing that led to that, where I've said, whenever we do a lesson, make sure it's a free one for that PDI, for that learner. Because they'll still benefit from it, so they'll want to take it, but it takes the pressure off you, and it takes pressure off me as well, because I can just be about you, and I'm not, we're not all looking at our watches going, oh, come on, we need to get this moving again. So yeah. I think free lessons is really important, as well as that mixture of,
I agree, and I think weirdly, though, I think those lessons with the pupils probably gain more from those lessons than the rest of them got us in the back chipping in with advice. Okay, so moving on, I just kind of wanted to sort of kind of be intrigued about your training a little bit, and how you found your training in the industry. I know you sort of just mentioned earlier about the fact you went through role play and your test was role play. The good old days, probably not. So yeah, how did you find your training as you went through, and then sort of going solo and all that sort of kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I always say to my PDIs that I am the case study for every mistake that you could make. I probably made it. And I can use that as kind of a case study and go, don't do this because I did this. I always use myself as, not a scapegoat, but, I've got experience. I've literally made every mistake you can probably think of. But yeah, my training initially was great. I had a trainer called Sean, who's now a personal trainer. And he was really good. He was, fun. He was relaxing, and he did the job really, really well. And then the mistakes started. I know it's something we're going to talk about later on, but I isolated myself from everybody. I didn't have any driving instructor friends because in my head, I think it's probably because of maybe like a football thing, but I always like to see it as, or I did at the time, kind of, me against you, so it was like all the driving instructors in my area are my rivals, my enemies. The examiner is the enemy, the big boss that we need to defeat. So it was very isolating. It was me and my learner against the world, which was kind of weird looking back. But I think it's probably because I was so young and maybe didn't have the maturity to do the job effectively. And I think I made a lot of mistakes because of my age. I don't think I was 25, but I think I was a very immature 25. People say I'm an immature 42 now, but I have the level of maturity required to do the job now, I think, which back then I didn't. So yeah, I made the mistake of just kind of plodding along and not listening. Obviously, back then there wasn't things like your podcast and the instructor podcast and the other ones out there. But I probably wouldn't have listened to them anyway, so it's irrelevant. It was just me against the world, and I did well and I had a good pass rate and everything. But I think it's the same in a lot of industries, and I suppose it's the same in sport as well, that if you stand still, you fall behind. And I didn't realize I was until I found out on my standards check.
That was going to be my next question. What changed? So what happened on your standards check?
Well, when I use this story to help PDIs, I always refer to myself as the stupid ostrich, because that's what I did. Head bang straight in the sand for years, just plodding along doing my own thing, and that came to a head where I went for my first standards check and failed, and the examiner said that was like a lesson from a time warp. Actual words of the examiner. Nice. And I thought it went brilliant. The learner thought it was brilliant, and we were laughing, going, "Oh yeah, that'll be a grade 6." And I'm like, "No, it's not grade 6 anymore. It's grade A." But I feel confident that I'll get grade A because I've got a grade 6 for the last 2 times. And yeah, she failed me, or he failed me. It was a man. He failed me. And the complete arrogance of who I was at that point just assumed that he was, not a very nice examiner, let's say. And I went and did it again 3 months later in a different town with a different examiner, thinking there's a solution right there, not seeing him again. And of course, I failed again. And then I was, an hour away from losing my job. So that was when, the penny dropped in terms of you need to get more training. And that's something that I see quite a lot. I mean, that's why I think I enjoy the PDI Doctor thing, because the majority of the time I spend with people are people who were where I was, panicking in fear. So I feel like I can help them because I've been through what they've been through.
Yeah. So you said about you'd had 6s before. So had you done standards check in the old style?
The check test.
The check test. Yeah, that's what it's called. Yeah, I remember. So you'd done a couple of those, and then it's when it changed to standards check that you then got caught out, because my guess is you were probably quite instructor led, and then that threw you when suddenly you were being told not to be.
I was doing everything that I'd always done that worked. And that's when people fail standards check now, that's what they say. I've always done it like this. It's always been fine. And a lot of people in the industry still refer to it as the check test. And they do that because they think it is the same exam with a different name. And of course, it's totally different. It's completely different. And they're always the ones I worry about. If you say check test, I'm worrying about you because you haven't changed. And, that's where, that was, like I said, when the penny dropped, where I thought you need to completely retrain because everything that you were doing before doesn't work anymore.
So I'm intrigued now. So you've completely changed your style, and obviously you must have done to get to what you're doing now. So I hear when this argument comes up on Facebook and situations that the argument is, like you said, I've always done it this way. My pass rate's great. Why would I change when it's working? That sort of kind of argument. So you did change, partly because you had to, because you were a last chance saloon.
It wasn't partly because of that. It was because
entirely because of that, yeah. So like comparing yourself back then to what you, I suppose in the eyes of the DVSA at the time, what you were a good instructor, and now you're a good instructor under the new terms of the DVSA. Which instructor do you prefer?
Definitely it didn't change, it got better. That's probably the best way to think of it, is that we discovered as an industry better ways and more effective ways of doing the job. So if you did it the old way, it still worked, but it wasn't as good as the new way. And I think there's still a lot of instructors that look at the new way and think it's not as good as the old way. Partly because of things always used to be better back in the day, but partly because they're not very good at doing the new way. And that's often the thing. So, well, if you're crap at coaching, you'll say that instruction is better because you're better at it. So I think, I was kind of fortunate to be having like a foot in both camps where I've done both, and I can categorically say it's better this way because it creates a better finished product, which is a learner who thinks for themselves and has their own thoughts and not a little robot person. I saw this kind of a few weeks ago on a lesson where a learner was moving off at the side of the road and he didn't signal. And my PDI said, you've not signaled there, and then started to make a big deal about not signaling and started to analyze it. And I said to the learner, why did you not signal then? Because that should have been the question that she should have asked him to find out his thoughts. And he said, well, there's no one around. And I thought, that is exactly what we want. And you're having to go at him for it. He's not this little robot that's gone check, 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 signal, handbrake, because that's what I've been taught to follow the commands of. He was having a look around. He went, nah, it's not around, not going to signal. And I thought, that's brilliant, that. And that's what we want. But I think that doesn't often happen because we're still teaching steps in a lot of cases, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think actually there's a little bit in that story that made me think, actually, if nothing else, just ask the pupil what their thoughts are, because that's going to get you a long way in correcting what you're doing. Because I see that quite a lot, again, where someone kind of goes off on a tangent or starts talking, and I have to just kind of, you chuck in that, like, what are you thinking, and then the story completely changes because we assume. I actually got brought out on this recently myself, teaching my daughter to drive, which is a very different dynamic, because when you're her dad, you do know better. And so but I quite often, because obviously we have that dynamic, she was also comfortable enough to tell me when I was wrong, and I would be saying, oh, is it because of this and this? And she went, no, that's not at all what I was thinking. And I think that's it made me go, oh, I wonder if I do that with my other learners. And I don't think I do. I think it was just the daughter scenario, but it made me think about it. And actually, it's so important that to make sure you're getting what the pupil's thoughts and feelings, because you're not going to be able to fix the problem if you don't dig into those
Yeah, I mean, the key thing is and I speak to a lot of PDIs that say, is there a list of effective questions that you can send me? I'm like, no, just ask the question that you don't know the answer to. You don't know why she's doing it, so find out.
Yeah,
Get her thoughts on it. It's not difficult. Just find out what you don't know.
absolutely. It's like being a little detective. I think sometimes when you're when you have a fault or a situation in the car, you turn into a detective. And I wonder if people sometimes, even when they take that sort of kind of analogy, they run with the physical what happened, and they're trying to work out what happened rather than the why did it happen. And the
Yeah.
why did it happen is in the pupil's head. So
Yeah.
we got to go hunting for that.
Yeah, I think the language is important as well. Using sort of empowering language like "Why do you think?" People often don't ask questions in the right tone. The right tone. So if you said, "Why do you think you didn't check your left mirror?" Why do you think? It's coming from a place of inquisitive. You want to know why they did, why they aren't doing that. Is it because they don't know they have to? Is it because they don't understand why they have to? Is it because their attitude is, it's only a fault? I just forgot. Do you forget your mum's birthday? Do you forget Christmas? Do you forget to look left and right when you cross the road? Oh no. So it's not important then to check your left mirror. So we need to make it important. But it's finding out why is the question that you don't know the answer to. So ask it.
Yeah, and I like the why do you think rather than why did that happen, because it softens the blow. It's getting their opinion.
Yeah, and it shows them that as well, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
it doesn't sound judgmental. It's basically, I'm not going to give you my thoughts. I'm not going to give you my opinions or lecture you or judge you. What's your take on it? And it empowers them because they think, oh, he values my opinion.
Yeah, I think another one while we're on this topic, another one I use with that, because sometimes people struggle with that, like giving their opinion, particularly when they're not used to being asked for it. So I can imagine an ADI or PDI does a training session with one of us and then gets told to go and ask or they've listened to this and they go and ask those questions, but they haven't been asking the pupils those questions, and so the pupils suddenly what? I don't know. And that's where you get your I don't know from. And you kind of need to train them up to do that. And one of the ways I kind of soften that blow is give me some reasons. I quite like that as an answer, because it sounds like there's more than one answer. Whereas if you say, like, tell me why that happened, it's like, oh, there's one right answer to this, and I'm under pressure, and I don't want to get it wrong. Whereas you give me some reasons why that might have happened, and then that opens up the options to sort of kind of have a guess at why it might have happened, and then you'll stumble across the reason why it did within that normally the first one they say, to be honest. But it just softens the blow and allows them those options to sort of kind of the freedom, I suppose, is what I go for, and helps them. And you got to train them. You got to train them to talk to you. I think is the key, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're right with what you said. That is spot on. I think it also triggers self-reflection as well, doesn't it? Where if they're thinking about the reasons, they're then analyzing it themselves and thinking about, well, yeah, what could have been the reason? So yeah, it triggers self-reflection, which is where learning happens anyway. So it's a really good way of doing it.
Yeah, and the more you do that as well, the more they then do that, like post test. And so when they get into a scenario after, if you've built this ingrained idea in their head that they analyze a scenario, they're not just going to go, oh, that guy was an idiot. They're going to go, well, what was my part in it? What could I have done differently? And situations, because you've just built that habit of thinking about driving in that way, which is what we want, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's to use a Bobism. You're getting the learning out of people, and then they can use those risk management skills, analysis skills when you're not there, which ultimately is the case. I mean, I think as an industry, we still look at it as in, when the learner is holding their pass certificate up in the air, that's the end. But that's day zero for that person. So they need to have tools that they're going to use from that day onwards. That and that's why I always say to my PDIs, if you tell them, it'll feel more comfortable to just tell them But if you get it out of them, then they are going to learn that long term, and they're going to have the tools that they can use long term. So you're actually, it might feel a little bit cruel sometimes just not telling them the answer that but it's in their best interest long term. And if we're talking about risk management, that's what we're doing long term, rather than just until they pass the test.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've often thought about what the percentage of a person's driving is driving lessons. So like if you think like what you say, you do 50 hours or something versus the amount of hours you do for the rest of your life, it's got to be like 0.000% of your life of your driving. And so like you said, but it might be the most important 0.0 because if you set them up with the tools to continue learning, then we're going to sort of kind of create safer drivers on the road. Yeah, so I just want to move on and talk about our competency for today. So today's competency is going to be were directions and instructions given to the pupil clear and given in good time. So I think, as always, I'm just going to pass this over to the guest and say, what does that mean to you, Lee?
Right, okay. So I mean, probably the first thing that I often see is it's almost like we misread it. Because I asked PDIs, exactly what you just said to me, what does this one mean to you? And they say, were directional instructions given to the pupil in good time? And I said, no, read it again. And they go, were directions and instructions given? So I was like, so it's not just about directional instructions, is it? And they go, do you know what? I've never thought of it like that. They're focusing always on directional instructions. So yeah, that's the first thing, is it's two different things. And looking at the first one in terms of giving directional instructions, there's one simple rule, which is don't become part of the problem. So, making sure that you're not delivering late or confusing instructions, that if your learner does it wrong, it should be because they did it wrong. It shouldn't be because you've contributed to it or caused it. Like a lot of things, your learner's performance is their potential minus distraction, isn't it? So if they're anxious, if they've got misplaced fear or stress or fatigue, all these things will diminish from their performance versus their potential. But the question you should ask yourself is it you? To give you another Bobism, pointing the finger of blame outwards, point it inwards instead and ask yourself, is it me? Am I causing the distraction? And with directional instructions, I've heard a lot of corkers this year. Ahead at the roundabout, turn right. So you just said ahead and right in the same sentence there. Right, I'd like you to turn left. It's like, what are you talking about? You need to be in the right lane. And then the learner moves into the right lane and the instructor goes, what are you doing? I said left lane. He said, no, you didn't. He said right lane. You meant the correct lane, didn't you? So, and that's just this year. So the key thing is I suppose it's to know your learner. So they've got to hear it and they've got to process it and they've got to carry it out. Are you giving them enough time? Did they need it earlier? How do you need to point sometimes? Some people with learning difficulties, they need to be pointed. You need to point, so knowing your learner and what they need from you is super important. And I suppose I always say to my PDIs on a trainee license, it's trial and error this, so if you give an instruction that's too late, give it earlier next time. If you give it too early, you give it later next time. But find out from your learner, if they feel that they need to be, pointed, do you need to point them? It's all about knowing the person really, which is kind of what client-centered learning is, isn't it? It's about making sure we're doing things in a way that work for that person, not in the way that you do it with everybody, kind of robotically. So I think with directional instructions specifically, I think self-reflection on your own performance, which kind of ties into the Unit 5 thing that we're going to talk about as well, is really important. So if you're asking, one of the things in Unit 5 is, can you get feedback on your own performance in a non-defensive way? So at the end of a lesson, if you're saying to a learner, so is there anything I've done that worked well for you today, or anything that I did that didn't work so well? If you've got that balanced relationship, then, they won't just say everything was great, which they'll often do if you don't have that balance. If you've got that kind of hierarchy of you're the all-knowing instructor and they're the stupid learner, they will always tell you that it was always great. But if you've got the right balance between instructor and learner, then they might say, I feel that you were giving me the instructions a little bit too late today. And you go, that's brilliant, because now I know for you to give them earlier next time. So I think you'll only really know your learner if you get feedback on your own performance from them on a lesson to lesson basis. And it's only when you know them that you'll know what instructions work for them. Something I saw a few weeks ago was we were approaching a roundabout, and we could see the roundabout all the way down the street. We could see it coming. And the instructor waited until maybe 10 car lengths to give the instruction. We had a conversation after that because we could see that roundabout coming from far away, what would have been the benefits of that learner knowing where they were going to go in advance? Because when they're driving on their own in real life, they're going to know where they're going. So it's not going to be sprung on them at the last minute whether they're going ahead or right at this roundabout. So can we let them know as early as possible so they've got time to actually think about it rather than just react to it, like they would on a driving test. So I think that's important too, that knowing the learner and working out what works for them.
Sorry, can I jump in with a couple of questions on a couple of those things? So there was a couple of things. So you said about signaling too early, not signaling, giving the direction too early. You can give the direction too early. Like, is that possible?
You can if your learner is taught like a robot.
Mm-hmm.
So if your learner is going to go mirror, mirror, signal as soon as you say it, then you can give it too early.
I think a lot of instructors use their directions to kick off the MSPSL routine.
Yeah, it's like a jumping off point, isn't it? It's like that's the point that we do it. And I think that's okay to start with. As the learner progresses, you could maybe give them 2 instructions and say, right, we're going to turn right at the roundabout, and then at the next traffic lights turn left, and just see what happens. Just see if they remember. But it means that they can, we've got a few in Preston where we've got we can turn right at the traffic lights, and we're always going to be turning right at the roundabout, and you're turning right at the light into a 2-lane road. So it's beneficial for them to know that they're going right at the roundabout to then turn from the traffic light into the right hand lane. So it's you can kind of build that in, I suppose, as you can build other things in, like following the sat nav, following road signs, or even just the later stage is just going, right, this is where we are. I want you to drive back to your house and see, does MSPSL stack up as well as it did when they were being prompted to start it at a certain point? And then you can discover that from there.
Yeah, I think one of the things I think about when you're giving directions is seeing it as a level of instruction, and changing that level of instruction for the level of the pupil. So like we talked about, you mentioned in the early days, it is actually quite helpful to say it at a particular time to kick off the pupil's routine, but then quite deliberately bringing that further back with acknowledgement of the pupil as well. Don't just start suddenly doing it because they'll just do. You've taught them to start MSPSL at that time, so you need to say, "Look, I'm going to start giving you the instructions earlier." And sometimes I go over the top with that, so we'll turn into a road, and I'll say, at the end of the road, we're going to turn left. It's quite a long way away. I want you to choose when you start that routine, and it starts to get them to look for the junctions and the clues and all that sort of kind of stuff. So I think within my question, when I was saying, like, could you signal to give the instruction too early? The answer is probably no, but as long as you've got that agreement with the pupil, even like when you said, like, take us home or take us to this place. So your instructions are super, super early there because it's like the entire journey, but with the agreement and for the right level of the pupil. So the other thing I wanted to pick up on was you talked about like the wording of the instruction. Are you quite particular with your guys, like how you get them to word the instruction, like not instruction, direction? I keep saying instruction.
Yeah, I mean, I am actually, I'm quite a stickler for that. because I want them to do it the same way that they get it on the driving test. If you're going to give someone direction instructions, do it in that way. I'm quite a stickler for not giving instructions to go ahead at mini roundabouts and traffic lights and crossroads, because on the test it's very likely that they won't receive that instruction, considering what they're told at the beginning to follow the road ahead at all times. That's something that I see quite a lot, where we're given an instruction to maybe go ahead at crossroads. When I ask the learner, when I ask the PDI why they're given that instruction, they'll say, well, I'm managing the risk because I don't want to have to shout stop or jump on the dual controls at that crossroads. So it's looking at it from kind of a short-sighted risk management point of view, rather than looking at it, is your learner going to know that that's there because you've told them, or did they know it was there? And is it going to be on the driving test when they don't receive an instruction, where the examiner is going to dual control them and fail the test? Or is it going to be even worse in real life when they have an accident? So telling your learner to go ahead at a crossroads is not managing risk. It's heightening risk, I think, because of what could happen in the future. So I think it's much better to not give an instruction and to have that little alarm bell go off in your mind where they aren't slowing down, and then you can verbally intervene to then not have to physically intervene, but then look at that as a serious incident, a safety critical incident, and look at it as, if you look back at the road that we're on, did you notice that it doesn't have a centre line? But then all of a sudden, look, he gets one. And that then tapers up to the give way line. And they go, I've never noticed that before. So there is that really valuable learning taking place. Because you didn't give the instruction, the incident, was playing out, which you verbally intervened to prevent. But that's a real lesson that's going to take place, where if you'd have given the instruction, you would never have known whether they knew it was there or not.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And although I rarely teach anything for the test, and definitely not test focused, I think with the giving instructions, why not make it easier? Basically, why not make it sound like the examiners, so that it doesn't feel weird when they get in the car with the examiners? So I agree, and I 100% again agree with the crossroad thing. The only thing I would maybe add to that is the fact that, again, maybe it's that level of support, isn't it? So if you've got a newer pupil, you may be offering that advice, but yeah, certainly your pupils coming up to test you, you don't want to be telling them stuff like that. I'm quite often hear ADIs and PDIs giving too much information. I actually quite often find the examiners give more information than I would give. I sat in the back of a test this week, and the examiner had said, we're going to follow signs for Cubantine Head, and as we then approached the roundabout, he said the road splits to the right. You need to stay next to the white. You need to stay in the lane nearest to the white line. And I was like, I wouldn't have told my people that. there's some pretty decent signposts and road markings telling them that. And I think it was because it was busy and you couldn't see the road markings. But you could see the road signs. And if you were on your own in the car there, you'd have had to work it out. And if you'd have gone the wrong way, you'd have had to go the wrong way safely. For me, that's... I wasn't complaining, but it's that same thing you were talking about. It's like the examiner is actually taking a bit of responsibility there for the pupil, and now I don't know if that pupil could do that in real life on their own.
You've got to question why as well. You've got to think, is this because they don't want an argument at the end? Is it because they want an easier life? Yeah. I've only got 10 minutes between now and the next test. I've got literally 2 minutes to go back in and grab something to eat and then come back out and do another test. Do I want an argument?
Yeah.
Just, a classic one like that is, when there's two lanes that turn right at the traffic lights, they often say, we're turning right at the lights. There's two lanes available that you can use to turn right, which is a massive clue, as in don't go in the right one.
I don't say that.
Yeah, ours do. But yeah, I mean, this one as well, it's not just about directional instructions, is it? It's about instructions in general. I mean, going back to what you were saying there, some part of the criteria for the, in the ADI one there is, it's seen as a lack of competence if you give unnecessary directions. So that's the one that always clicks to my mind, going straight on at a crossroads. To me, that's an unnecessary direction. But yeah, it's also about instructions as well, that your learner is potentially relying on to perform a task, isn't it? If you've agreed to prompt them or agreed to talk them through something. And it's also about questions. And this is sort of an issue that I see, especially when being assessed. Do I need to ask questions on part 3 for the sake of asking questions? It's like, no, you don't. Sometimes silence is important to let the learner think. And part of the criteria in the ADI 1 for this one is, are we distracting the learner? Can we overload them with too much information and distract them that way? So for me, if you're going to ask questions, they need to be the right questions, to not distract them. And for me, there's 2 types of questions. There's proactive questions that you're going to ask that are designed to proactively manage risk. What can you see ahead? What's the plan for this? Are you going to go or wait? Find out what's going to happen before it happens. It can be really valuable and help you manage the risk. Like that example there with like parked cars on both sides and a car coming the other way. What's the plan here? Are you going to go or wait? A lot of people see that as, well, that's over instruction, but it's a neutral question. If you said to them, where are you going to stop? That's heavily suggesting that you want them to, and therefore is over instruction, is therefore helping. But if you ask them, are you planning to go or wait? Then it's neutral. So your learner could say, I'm going to stop behind the red car there, so all is well. Or they could say, I've got enough room to get through the gap, and you can shut that down verbally before you get to a point where you physically have to intervene moments later. So questions designed to manage risk in a proactive way, they're all right. They're not going to distract them. But the other types of questions are the ones that you use to self-reflect on something that's not right. So these are about past events, like what happened back at that roundabout there. Sometimes those questions are taking your learner's head into the past, and that detracts from their focus on what's going on in the present and the future. What's going on ahead, what might happen next. We're not thinking about that anymore. We're thinking about what happened back at that roundabout 5 minutes ago, because that's where you've took their head. And then there might be a little old lady stood on a zebra crossing that we didn't notice, and we had to dual control them. That's because you're distracting them. So, for me, I've always said, learning happens at the side of the road and practice happens on the road. So, there's a time and a place for self-reflection on past events, and it's quite often not on the move, unless you can tick quite a lot of boxes. Is it going to distract the learner? Is number one. Is it going to distract me? Am I going to be saying, so why do you think blah, blah, go left there? So that's distracted me from my directional instruction because I was in the middle of a conversation about something that just happened. And striking the balance between theory and practice is what they look for on the standards check and the part 3, isn't it? So it doesn't have to be, on the move all the time. There is a time and a place to part them up, get learning to take place through self-reflection, and then go and practice what we have learned on the road. And then we've got that balance. But I think, reading your learner's body language is important for this one as well, isn't it? Because, do they look confused? Do they look stressed? And pointing that finger of blame inwards again and going, is that me? Have I caused this confusion? Have I caused this stress? Talking to them, finding out, is what you're doing working, or is what you're doing actually causing problems? And again, that links into what we said earlier about getting feedback on your own performance. When you were talking to me when we were at that roundabout, it was dead confusing. Brilliant. I'll remember not to do that next lesson then, and I can tailor my lesson better to you as an individual.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. And I think, again, you pointed out that I think a lot of people think this competency is just about the directions, and actually probably you get marked down more for the other stuff, for the instructions element. Yeah, the question thing actually is interesting because you're right. I'm with you on this, where the reflection needs to happen at the side of the road, because it is hard to reflect while you're driving, even as an experienced driver. Like if I went for a drive and had to try and think of, I don't know, business plan or something like that while I'm driving, I'm probably not driving very well while I'm doing that, or I'm certainly not at the top of my game. And you're asking an inexperienced driver to do that. One way to sometimes get around that, I find, is to flag it with the pupil. So flag the moment, make sure that they in like, so just remember that moment for me. Remember that blue car, so that when you do get that opportunity to pull over, they've got it in their head, rather than just ignoring it and then talking about it later. Another one I sometimes use as well to prevent sort of over analyzing and overthinking about behind, is getting them to scale like a situation in the moment. So like I was on a lesson the other day, and we were talking, they were making decisions, and I just wanted them to scale their decision, and we were actually scaling the time it took from their brain to say yes to their foot to say yes. And we were scaling that, and we were able to very then quickly, as we exited the roundabout, get a number. But I didn't normally, then with scaling, the number doesn't really matter, and you want to dig into the reasons behind. But it gave me a number so that when we pulled over, I could then say, right, that was a free. Talk to me about that free. And
Really good.
and that sort of kind of allows you to do a little bit of retrospective on the road, but without waiting for like a long conversation, and then the next roundabout's turning up and you're like, oh, shut up, I need to talk about this this one.
That
Yeah.
links into what we said about knowing your learner. You know that works for that person. So that's really the key thing. I mean, the other thing with this one is kind of, one of the don'ts in terms of the criteria is giving unnecessary instructions. And I think sometimes we do that. And this is where it kind of intermingles into lesson planning as well. Because I'll give you an example. I see this quite a lot where, the plan for this lesson is we're going to prompt the learner. We're going to use prompts for this thing that we're working on. And I always say to them, well, what exactly are you doing there? What is exactly the help? What bits do they want prompting with exactly? And they go, well, they've asked me to prompt them. We're doing roundabouts and they've asked me to prompt them. It's like, well, what is it exactly? Where is this prompt going? Is it all the prompts? And if we write out MSPSL on a piece of paper and go, right, who is exactly doing what? Mirrors, right? Who's doing that? Is that you or is that me? What about the signaling? What about choosing the lane? Is that me or is that you? What about who is responsible for that moment where we decide if we're going to go or not? Is that me or is that you? So making sure it's absolutely crystal clear that you know exactly what you're doing and the learner knows exactly what they're doing. And the bits that they've decided that they're going to do for themselves are the ones that you can then self-reflect on at the end of that phase of practice to see if their performance lives up to their claims of this is what I did. I said I was going to do this on my own. Did you do it on your own? Yeah, you did. It was fine. Or maybe there's an issue there. But I think going back to giving unnecessary instructions, if you don't know exactly what you're responsible for, you're then more likely to give instructions that were unnecessary to the learner. So I think the key thing is making sure you're both on the same page. You know exactly what bits you're doing and how you're doing it, and the learner agrees with that, and they know exactly what bits they're responsible for just that short burst of activity that you're doing, which we can then reflect on and go, right, do we need to make this easier or do we need to make it harder? How did it go? Did it work? Did it not work? Do we need more of a challenge or less of a challenge? But making sure we're all on the same page before we execute that plan is really important. So that's where this is a risk management competency, but it completely interacts with the lesson planning section as well.
Yeah. And roles and responsibilities as well. That it's all kind of interlinked, isn't it? And that's just the way the standards check and part 3 works. Is the competencies do massively hang upon each other. So the other part of this competency about saying, like we've talked about it being in good time, but the other said, like, were they clear instructions? Do you have any tips for? I mean, I'm probably more talking for like PDIs here rather than ADIs, to help them with things like being better at talking through, like doing a full talk through with a pupil, because again, you can get marked down here for not being clear with your instructions of clutch down, first gear, that sort of kind of thing. waffling too much within theirs. And I would agree again with your prompts where you were talking about earlier. The questions and the prompts need to be clear and not like this long-winded question. Do you have any tips that you give your guys for that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, full instruction, it feels like a thing from the past if you're doing the job in the modern way, to start with anyway. But there is a place for it. That, if you're working on, approaching roundabouts, for example, where we should be taking the fact that we've got responsibility for MSPSL already, and we can move off and we can park up and we can do clutch control, we can do steering, we can do progressive braking, we can do all these things. So to full instruct someone on approach to a roundabout would suggest that their MSPSL routine is not in place, and therefore their needs for that lesson is not roundabouts. It's that, so if you do that right, then there shouldn't be a need to do that. Like if you work on sub skills and stuff at the start of a learner's journey, and they figure out how to find the biting point, how to set off, then if you were talking them through moving off at the side of the road, you could just say, prepare the car, and they should know and have the ability to go clutch down into first and find the bite successfully. Why are we working on moving off if they can't do clutch control, if they can't do that, so that would be their need. But there is a place for it. But so when we are using it, the tip that I use is that it's just bullet points. Like you said, clutch down into first, find the bite. Bullet points, clear and concise. Going back to when I was doing my training in 2007, my training buddy, because it was all done 2-to-1. He now runs a really successful driving school in Preston. So we're both done all right for ourselves. But one day he wasn't feeling well, and they buddied me up with this other guy, and he was about 65 years old. And he was a bit like my husband. He was like, rather than say, instead of saying it in 3 words, I'll make this big dramatic sentence about it, and use loads of long words for no reason. And he was a bit like that. And he just couldn't get it. And he was going, we were doing moving off strangely enough, and he was going, okay, if you may, can you please press the clutch all the way down to the bottom? Yes, thank you very much. And now can you please select first gear? Thank you very much. And he was just waffling on like that. And my trainer was going, clutch down, into first, find the bite. So bullet points. And he just wouldn't get it. So that's what I'd always recommend for full instruction. So the learner doesn't have to decipher between which bit is the waffle and which bit is the instruction. Just bullet points. And in terms of prompted instruction, I think we get that wrong massively across the board. Because if I asked sort of 100 PDIs, if your learner was not checking the left mirror and you were going to prompt them to check it, what would your prompt be? And probably 90% of them would say, which mirror have you got to check? And I always say to them, that would work. And I did that for years. But that prompt is designed to get someone to look at a piece of glass that you want them to look at. And a good prompt should be designed to get someone to think about risk, which would then subsequently get them to do the thing. So the thing that I always say to my PDIs with this is that if you've had a good conversation in theory about risk before we've then put this plan together, then there would have been a keyword somewhere. So you might have said to your learner who's saying, "No, I just forgot to check my left mirror. I just forgot." And for me, that's an attitude thing, because it's, we don't forget Christmas. We don't forget, your mum's birthday. You don't forget to look left and right when you cross the road, but you're forgetting this. So it's not a big deal to me. And we need to kind of make it a big deal. So you would talk about risk and you'd say, well, if there was a cyclist there, what could happen if? And your learner would have that moment of realization and go, oh, God, I could have hit a bike. It's like, right, that's good. So what would you do differently next time? Oh, I've got to make sure I check that left mirror from now on. But they didn't say cyclist and they didn't say bicycle. They said bike. And at that moment, there was an image of an injured cyclist running through their mind, which is when they've had that moment of realization about what the risk is. And they've said bike. There is your prompt. So you're then prompting them. They look in the center mirror and you go, any bikes? And as soon as you say any bikes, that image of that injured cyclist comes flooding back in their head. And as a response to that, they'll go and check that left mirror. So a prompt should always be to get them to think about the risk again, which knits together the theoretical conversation that you've had at the side of the road about risk to the practical exercise that you're doing. So if it was a right mirror thing, you could say, any overtakers? Oh, you know, if it was a center mirror thing, you could say, how close is that car behind you? Oh. And a prompt should do that. I mean, something I've noticed quite a lot since I work with PDIs on Plat 2 is they have a habit of doing things they think I want them to do when they first start. So they'll be approaching a traffic light that's on red. They'll look up at the center mirror and then they'll brake. And I'm going, oh, that was lovely, that. I bet you don't do that normally, do you? In my head. And then I'll say to them, what color was the car behind you? And they go, red. I'm like, well, why did you need to look again? And they go, oh, to be honest, I didn't see it the first time. So what's the point? Do you know what I mean? So I think it prompts are good to get people to realize why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, no, I love all of that. I agree with the talk throughs. I barely do talk throughs. I use talk throughs, and I explain this to my PDIs that it's a really important skill to have, but because it gets you out of the shit. Basically, it's when the pupil's not handling the scenario and you need to be rescued. You need to have good talk through. So actually, that's why it's so important to have it, because it'll get you out of scenarios. And then the thing you were talking about with prompts, I like to call those action questions. The which mirrors are you going to check, because it evokes an action. And I suppose in a way that they're not, like, you're right, they're not great questions. I think maybe as you're starting out your journey as a PDI, I'm okay with, like, if you can't think of a question, like, say something, and that can be helpful. But learn to sort of kind of, like you say, invoke those questions of, like, is anyone overtaking us? Absolutely, 100% agree with all of that. Only one I don't agree with is, and this is just a bugbear of mine, and I'm not a fan of disagreeing, I guess, but is the what color is the car question.
Yeah,
I get the idea behind it. I just like to tweak it a little bit, because I don't care what color the car is, because, like you said, actually, about the bike and stuff, the color of the car doesn't affect our driving. What I tend to go for is what's the behavior of the car behind.
Yeah.
Or what were they doing? And you'll get the same thing, won't you? Like, well, actually, I don't know what they were doing, actually. And it has the same thing, but that's what you really want from the person, is the what are they doing, not what, like, if it's a blue car.
In that scenario, it kind of comes from a place of me trying to find out if they're actually seeing or are they just looking.
But
so
I would
we'll
argue
to identify that. But what you said is exactly the same. It would, you're getting them to think about the behavior of the car behind. You know, they will see as well as look. So I think
that's the key. Yeah. But yeah, no, I like the concept behind it. It's exactly the same idea. Is yeah, everything. I agree with that. I'm just trying to see if I have any more notes on this before we move on. The only other thing I've got a little bit about machine gun questioning, which we've kind of touched on, which I don't know. It's like it quite often happens with, like, awareness and planning. Like, you're driving through town, and the PDI is just sort of like, what's the bike doing? What's this doing? What's that car doing? What's the pedestrian crossing doing? And all that sort of thing. The people's like, oh, what the hell? And it's that distracting again, isn't it? Yeah. And how do you go about that then? How do you sort of kind of negate that?
Well, that was when I did my last standards check. That was one of the things that I got pulled up on myself. Is and I think it was from a place of, I'm trying to get as much learning done as possible, because my last standards check, which I actually voluntarily applied for because I needed to get an A to apply for audit. It was really it was like a high pressure thing, because if I didn't get an A, then a B was like a fail to me for what I needed to do. I needed an A more than anything. And yeah, I scored an A, but that's what she scored me down for, is that I was overloading her with too much of it. So I think it's, you know, it again comes down to what we said earlier, which is, you know, ask someone a question, but then, you know, wait for the response and let them, and, you know, think about what you said and respond to it, because you don't really need to mention everything that's on the road. So base your questions on the key things that you've seen. If there's nobody at the zebra crossing, do we need to mention it? If there's someone walking near it, then we'd mention it. So it's really, the idea is you're asking questions to get your PDI's eyes up the road, because they need their eyes on full beam when they're watching learners. So it's kind of it's a part 2/part 3 skill. It's transferable. So I think asking questions designed to get them to see, get them to look further than they would normally look. And I think that works with learners as well, because learners have a habit of looking down the bonnet, don't they? So if you can get their eyes further up the road and making plans early for what they've seen early, then it removes the suddenly factor from a lot of things.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I think particularly the bit you mentioned about you don't have to talk about everything on the road, and I think that's in a way you don't have to stuff all the learning into the first loop. It's basically there'll be other times around that you can add to the learning. I think that can sometimes be the issue.
That's what I do with when I'm doing commentary driving. So I think commentary driving for a part 2 person is really valuable, because it's something they can do outside the sessions and utilize private practice better, because they're doing something that's not being autopilot, doing what I always do. It's changing what I always do, and you get different results than what they always do. And we do that in a kind of a layered process, where we'd look at maybe the first layer, and they're just calling out triangles, circle signs, road markings, and bends. So they don't have to mention anything else. But I'm not asking questions. I'm getting them to tell me, and I think that's better than firing questions at them. So they're calling out. I can see there's a triangle there for a bend. The road's bending to the right, and we're not mentioning anything else. That's layer 1, and then in layer 2 we add in things that could make you deviate. So if it's going to make you steer or brake, add that in as well. So now we're talking about road signs, bends, and road markings, and maybe parked cars and traffic lights ahead and zebra crossings ahead, and just literally calling them out, nothing further. Just see it and say it. And then in the third layer, we're now going to talk about, we're going to do the same as layer 1 and 2, but this time we're going to talk about what we're going to do about it. So then they're talking themselves through what they can see and what their plan is, and that's where it becomes educational, because they can coach themselves now. They're telling themselves what they need to do about what they've seen. And then in the fourth layer, we add in anticipation. What could happen if, and what am I going to do in case it happens? And then you end up with this person who can commentary drive really well, but they've and the good thing about layering is if it's not working, if they are overloaded, we can go back to the previous layer and get that working as well. So it works well for part 2, because it allows PDIs to understand that concept that they're going to use with their learners, which is if it's working, then challenge them further, but if it's not working, support them further.
Definitely. And I think commentary as well helps, because it gets you used to getting your words out as well, so it then translates over to the part 3 as well. And yeah, no, it's a great tool for both part 2 and part 3, and linking the two. I think there was talk about commentary driving becoming part of the part 2 test.
I think it should be.
Yeah,
I think that would be a good idea, because it's such a key tool. Because if you've got your eyes on full beam on part 2 and you're looking ahead and you're noticing stuff really far away, then on part 2 you can notice that stuff, and then you can start looking at your learner to see if they're reacting to what you've seen when you would do it. So it ties in with, was the trainer aware of the surroundings and the pupil's actions, which is one of the key risk management competencies. So that all comes from good part 2 training, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So shall we move on to our unit on the national standards for driver and rider training? So we're going to talk about unit 5, which is evaluate and develop your knowledge, understanding, and skills in the driver/rider training industry. So again, Lee, I'm gonna jump in with just tell me what you think.
Well, I think before we started recording today, you summed it up really nicely. So there's 8 different performance standards in this one, and there's 14 requirements of stuff that you need to know and understand. So knowledge, understanding, 14 things, stuff you need to do, 8 things. And you summed it up perfectly when you just do CPD. That's what they all mean. And I mean, one of them is really interesting. It says like one of the knowledge and understanding requirements in Unit 5 of the National Standard for Driver and Rider Training is to have a knowledge and understanding of the requirements of the National Standard for Driver and Rider Training.
I love that bit, yeah.
That's my favorite. That's like when you're a kid and you plug your video camera into your TV and you point it at your TV and you get that infinite warp of TVs through your TV. That's what that is. Exactly what that is. But it's basically a list of stuff that I didn't do. You know, and like I said earlier, all my mistakes are good examples of what not to do and how to get yourself out of a hole if you put yourself in one. That stupid ostrich thing again, smash straight into the sand. And I think with this, I'm not alone with this. This is a thing. That instructors in this industry generally only take CPD when they need to. And that's the people that take their own CPD seriously are, for me, a minority. And the people listening to this will disagree with that, but that's why they're listening to this. And the ones that would benefit genuinely from the stuff like this podcast and like Terry's podcast and the other ones are the ones that won't be listening to it and probably never will. So, you know, it's so important to get that mindset of get better or stand still. And a lot of people get like that because they've failed the standards check twice, like me. So I think, you know, if we're going off the way that the highway code is written, you know, it says the highway code is musts and shoulds. This is a list of musts. It says you must. So it's almost like saying these are the things that you must do or else. But there is no really there is no really how do we police that? Because a lot of people don't even know this exists. You know, I speak to a lot of people who have failed Part 3 or standards check twice, and I'll ask them what their knowledge of the National Standard for Driver and Rider Training is, and they go, "What's that?" So if you don't know it exists, how can you police yourself against it? And I think there is one way that we do get policed against that stuff that you must do from this criteria, and that's the standards check. So in a roundabout way, you know, no pun intended, the standards check is the policing of this criteria, and eventually you will get found out if you're not, you know. So you could go, I don't need CPD, I'm fine, but eventually there'll be a point where it looks like you should have done because of the result you got on your standards check. So it says you must know and understand the requirements of standards check. That's one of them. So it all kind of intermingles because you need to know and understand standards check. You need to know and understand this stuff. And if you do that, you will then be all right at standards check. So it all kind of links together. But, you know, I see it all, you know, you see it on Facebook all the time. Am I all right to teach a maneuver on standards check? It's like, no. Why do you not know that? And if you read the updated version of this, then you'll know you can't, you know, of the criteria. But I think it's a lack of understanding of the criteria for standards check, the ADI one, and it's a lack of understanding of the criteria of this that causes people to kind of go in a hole, because people don't do that. They don't read it. So I think that's the key thing is you've got to, and I always commend the people that I work with through ADI Doctor, the ones that have gone, I've not got a standards check booked, but I want to get ahead of the game. Same with people on Part 3. And those people I just look at them and go, I wish I was you. I wish I'd have been like that before I went through the trauma of failing 2 standards checks the year before my wedding, and then spending weeks and weeks going, I'm going to lose my job. I'm not going to be able to afford my wedding. You know, all this could have been avoided. So I think that's one of the key things is, you know, make sure you know and understand what you need to know and understand about the job that you're trying to do. And if you don't, find out. And if you can't find out, then get someone to explain it to you.
Yeah, like partly that's why I wanted to do this section of the podcast is not enough people read it, and I'm hoping by talking about it, people will go and read it in a bit more detail, or at least take some snippets from what we've said. But yeah, definitely you're right. It's this section, so like it is just like do CPD, but it's and I actually I hadn't even taken into account the fact that it said must. Um,
Mm.
and and how, yeah, not like, oh, please do this. It's like, if you want to be a driving instructor, you must do this CPD, and like you said, then it's hard to police other than it shows up on the standards check. The I do think that there's an element, and I've spoken to quite a few people recently about this, where when you pass your part three, there's this element of not even actually, I think from the newly qualified ADI's perspective, but that you're done, and you get dropped a little bit by your trainer, or
Yeah.
and it maybe if you're in like a smaller franchised company, that you might be getting a bit more support. I know I sort of kind of do with my guys, but yeah, there isn't, but I suppose there's this element, and even then, I think my guys don't get as much attention as they did when they were PDIs. Um, and I think this is where you obviously kind of went down a similar story where you were done. I'm trying to think back when I was first training. I'm sure there was definitely a period where I was done, but then I started, like, when I was working for BSM, there was lots of different courses going on, and I just took up every opportunity to go on a course. But there is this, I suppose podcasts like this are great, and Terry's podcast, because I think actually it's more important to do, and the key word is continuous professional development, to do lots of little bits than one workshop a year, because I think that's a lot of information in a really short, in like a short space of time, and then you're not going to keep all that information, and then you're not going to implement, you're going to implement even less, and then it's some of it's going to stick, some of it's not. Whereas if you're just doing little baby steps all the time, you're going to develop much better as a driving instructor. So yeah, I think that's probably the way I would sort of kind of go about this now if I was starting out in the industry.
I mean, it's, if you think about what you've said there about kind of, it feels like you're dropping them and they're out on their own. It's exactly the same with learners, isn't it? It's like, how many learners ring you up 2 weeks after the test and say, "Oh, I was at this roundabout, I'm not sure." That just doesn't happen. It's just like a severing, most of the time. I mean, one of the things that it mentions in Unit 5 is, evaluate yourself. And that should always be against your knowledge of the standards check criteria and the national standard criteria. We don't, unfortunately, unfortunately or fortunately is one of them. We don't live in a world anymore where you can do this job your way, and Joe Blogg's driving school does it differently on his street next to you, and you both get passes and it all works and it's lovely. When the national standard was written, it was to create this kind of uniform approach, so we don't get these cowboys that we used to have in the industry. Like my driving instructor, for example, who I would, he would say, pull up on the left, Lee. So we'd pull up on the left, and then, oh, we're at the shops, and he'd get out and go and get some cigarettes. Right? This kind of cowboy approach. It feels like with the national standard that's what it is. It's a standard, and it's far higher than it used to be. And the idea is to create better instructors and therefore better learners and therefore better, safer drivers on the road. So it's raising the bar, and you've got to stick to it because it's the minimum standard of where you need to be. We don't live in that world anymore. It's now like, if you go into Tesco in a different town, you know where the bread is, because they want that uniform approach where if a learner goes to a different instructor, they are the same. They're using the same sort of structure, not exactly, but similar. And there's only one way you can do it now, and that's where a lot of people fail part 3 and standards check, and this is what I failed as well, where I've done it my way and my way works, and I get loads of passes and I get loads of good feedback, and the examiner just looks at it and goes, "That's the national standard for driver and rider training, and that was you, and that didn't reflect that, so you failed." So working in a way every day that meets the standard of the national standard is the best way you can, keep on top of things. Not only will it help develop learners faster because the techniques in the national standard are better than what we used to use, and I can say that because I've done both. So your learners will develop faster and they'll obtain a long-term learning easier. But you're also practicing for getting an A on your standards check every bloody lesson. So it's good for you as well, right? So you can't police this because people are self-employed and they'll do what they want. But what I give to my PDIs is like a self-reflection form that they can either laminate or print off loads of them, whatever they want to do. But it's to be filled in at the end of the lesson when the learner gets out. And it's a list of questions to generate self-reflection, and all these questions are based on the criteria of the ADI 1 and the national standard. Did you do this? Is one of the questions. And underneath, they have to write down their thoughts. I did do this or I didn't do this. I met the criteria or I didn't meet the criteria. So they can then look at that, and that then helps them for the next lesson because their needs and their goals come from their self-reflection of that lesson that I could have done better with. So what could I do differently on my next lesson to meet the criteria closer, to match the criteria compared to the previous lesson? And I think when people get into that mindset of doing that, you're looking at it and going, this is what I did. This was the criteria. Did it match? How can I make it match next time? Am I seeing a pattern of missing this certain criteria over and over again? Is that something I need to take up with Lee and go, Lee, I'm struggling with this one. I know I'm struggling with this because I've matched my performance against the criteria in this self-reflection form. Because like we said earlier, with learners learn best when they self-reflect on their own performance. But as PDIs, we're not doing that as much. And I think, especially with PDIs, it's all about the learner. And they seem to care more about the learner than their own development. And the amount of times that I get people through and they say, I've got my final part 3 attempt in 3 weeks' time. Can you fit me in? And I go, well, I'm booked up for like 7-8 weeks, but I could do 8 o'clock on next Thursday. I don't work at 8 o'clock, but I could fit you in at 8 o'clock because it's your part 3 soon. And they go, I can't do, I've got a lesson. I'm like, well, do the lesson then, think about yourself, like you should be, the phrase that I always say to them is, well, if you did fail your part 3, you're not going to have any learners to worry about. It's pretty harsh, but it registers the point. That self-reflection is where learning happens, and you're not self-reflecting on your own performance lesson by lesson. So you're just churning out the same thing over and over again. And it doesn't take me to come and go, this is the criteria, this is what you did. You should be able to do that yourself if you know what the criteria is. So I think that self-reflection form is a good way of doing it. But of course, sometimes they stick to it and do it every day. And some people go in and they've got dog hairs on backseat, the reflection form covered in dog hairs. So it's like you've got to help yourself. Something that I've been thinking about for a long time that I think would be a really good way of helping with CPD is like a mentorship program within the industry. Because that's kind of what I did kind of unofficially. Because I'm the kind of person that I can't hear different voices. It just distracts me. It's confusing. So when I was in that hole of I failed my standards check twice and I've got 1 attempt left, I've got Howard, I've got Bob, I've got Graham Hooper, I've got Chris Benstead, there's loads of options here. But I think I'm just going to pick one, and I picked Bob because I liked his YouTube videos. And I've never done a CPD session with anyone that's not Bob, because I believe Bob is like the top trainer in the UK, and I don't need distractions. I'm just going to focus on Bob and Bob's voice. And I think, so I've done it kind of unofficially, but I think PDIs coming in, when you said that we have that kind of severing, I think if we had, some sort of unofficial thing or some sort of official thing where we have a mentor within the industry that we can bounce stuff off, because it's a lonely world as an ADI, and you've not got a boss, you've not got a line manager that you can, so I think it's a good idea to have someone within the industry that you can use as like a soundboard, and you can do CPD with them, and someone that can get you on course and someone that can keep you on course, because that's what I did. That's what I've done with Bob, and we've ended up being good friends. rather than being like, my mentor,
It's not what he said.
Well, I'm not surprised at all, but it's kind of like a casual mentorship. There's nothing written down, there's nothing in that, but he is my mentor, and he will be the first person I put questions to or ask advice from. And I think if every PDI coming into the industry had that person, then they wouldn't be on their own, and they won't be constantly making mistakes that will only catch them out when they do the standards check.
Yeah, no, I love that idea, and I did the same. And Lou was my mentor, and definitely sort of every time I needed something, I went to Lou for that. It's interesting actually, and I'm going to use this as an opportunity to plug my new membership, which we are seeing as a mentorship. So with Inspire Instructor Training and Diana and Decalion, and we're going to sort of release a bit more information about that as we go. That is our goal, is that we're creating a mentorship, really, that people can pay okay, you got to pay a monthly fee, but that's because we want to be paid for our time, which is fair enough. But it's ongoing and it's continuous, and we are effectively saying, come join us, and we will be your mentors in this situation through Zooms, through training videos, through one-to-ones, through a Facebook group, and basically we're going to be that person for you, in the way that Lou was that person for all three of us, and that's kind of what we want to create. So yeah, it's interesting you sort of kind of said that, and I think it's interesting that you went and found that person in Bob, and that's, I don't think there's any way of like forcing that on the industry, but maybe that is, like you said, what people need to do is they need to effectively latch on to someone and go that way, because I think you're right, actually. There's lots of different noises and sort of kind of ways of talking. Like, well, I've spoken to several different trainers on this podcast, and you all have different styles to a certain extent. So maybe it's a case of try a few, and then choose the one that you're then going to continue to do your training with. Maybe it's listen to this podcast or Terry's podcast, and you get a flavor of what they're about. So yeah, I always say this. If I recommend someone to you, I always say, he's got an episode on Terry's podcast. Go and listen to him first and see if you get that vibe. And
that's why nobody ever rings me. That's why I never really recommend it.
I'll recommend them to listen to this episode now, so maybe they'll enjoy it a bit more. But yeah, I think that's absolutely should be the way that we go about it, because I agree with what it says in the national standards here, where it says about self-reflection, but sometimes you need someone else's perspective, or you need to bounce ideas off someone else, or some feedback from someone else. And again, it says that in the national standards as well. So yeah, 100% sort of kind of like, that's the way we kind of want to take what we're going to be offering. Sorry, I couldn't help but throw in a massive plug there, because you were talking basically about what we're offering. So before I give you so actually, yeah, I think we'll wrap it up a little bit there, unless you have anything else you want to add about the national standards. Or
no, I mean, read it. That's what I'll add to it.
Yeah, go read it. Yeah, don't just listen to us yabber on about it. So I ask everyone on the podcast to finish off with a final like top tip for ADIs and PDIs. But before you give us that top tip, do you want to tell everyone where they can find you and what you offer?
Yeah, I offer part 3 and standards check training. I offer full courses for part 2 and part 3 locally, but I offer nationwide support for part 3 and for standards check training. Whether you are, training for your first attempt, or whether you find yourself in a situation where you've not been successful, then I can help. You can find me on adidoctor.co.uk or pdidoctor.co.uk, the twins for whichever persuasion you are, or on Facebook or any of the social media channels. So everything starts with a conversation. So if you've got questions and you feel that I could help them, hit me up and we'll have a chat.
Brilliant. So Come on then, what's your top tip for ADIs and PDIs?
My top tip would be, especially if you're a PDI, going into part 3, or an ADI going into standards check, is make sure you do everything you can to know exactly what's required. And you can get a lot of that from the stuff that's been online and available for a long time, like the ADI one. But if you don't know, don't just give it a go. Make sure you know exactly what you're up against, what the criteria is, and what you need to do to satisfy that criteria, because that gives you the best chance of success.
Cool. Yeah, I like that. And like you said, if you don't know, go speak to Lee. So, don't just ask a random ADI that will give you their opinion on it. I think is probably the key. Ask someone who lives and breathes this sort of stuff, to sort of help you.
I mean, when I was when I was training, my trainer said to me, if you've got 2 driving instructors in a room, there'll be 3 opinions. And I didn't get it at the time, but I think since the explosion of social media, being a PDI now is like a minefield. You've got all this YouTube content, all this stuff, and some of it is just crap. And it's not fair that it's being thrown at people and they've got all these different voices. This is why I said I focused on one voice. Because when YouTube came out, back in the day, its slogan was broadcast yourself. And before that point, to be broadcasted, you had to know your stuff on TV or radio. But now you don't have to know your stuff at all. And there's lots of voices, and not all of it is particularly helpful. Especially some of the older videos that may have been useful before maybe the part 3 or the standards check changed in 2020. So a lot of it is advice on how you can take someone new and you can teach a new subject. And if you happen to listen to that video now and it's got loads of views and loads of likes, it might be out of date and it's still up. So yeah, if you're not sure, then ask. And the best questions that you don't the best questions are the ones that, the stupid questions are the ones that you don't ask. That's where I was going with that. So if there's anything that you're not sure about, ask your trainer. If you don't get clarity from your trainer, ask someone else who knows what they're talking about.
Brilliant. So yeah, we're going to wrap that up then. So thank you, Lee, for joining us and spending a little bit of your time sort of educating everyone. So yeah, thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Inspire Instructor Podcast, where the learning never stops.